All right.
So, hello everybody. My name is Christian Willauer, and I really appreciate the chance to come and talk with you tonight about property taxes, which is something that is um, a lot of people are talking about. And my goal is to give a little bit background of what I've learned. I serve on Wilmington City Council, represent the 5th District, and I heard, first started hearing about how important property taxes were because residents in the 5th District started to call me and tell me that they saw their assessments going up and they wanted to understand what was going on. So I made a big effort to try to understand and have done a lot of research, and I'm really happy to be able to share that with you tonight. So just to give background on the timeline, I'm sure people remember, but there was a court case that was really around educational equity. That was in 2018. And the court decision that came out of that, there's a few different parts to it, but one of the parts was a requirement that the all three counties in Delaware conduct assessments because the property values had not been reassessed since 1983 or longer, and the court decided or deemed that they no longer represented the actual fair market value of the properties, and that basically Delaware needed to bring its assessments up to date. So in Newcastle County's case in 2021, Newcastle County hired Tyler Technologies to conduct a countywide reassessment. And those reassessments were completed in March of this year, 2025. And immediately I started on council in January. And when the um, report from Tyler Technologies came to the city of Wilmington, city council members and city leadership immediately noticed that in Tyler Technologies' final report, the assessed values for Wilmington properties did not meet industry standards for accuracy in the city of Wilmington. They met industry standards for accuracy across the county, but they did not meet industry standards for accuracy in the city of Wilmington. So in May of this year, Wilmington City Council passed a resolution. It was unanimous of all members present. Um, and we requested the city not use the new assessment values until they meet standards. Um, so the next thing that happened was, a lot of discussion, but the tax bills were mailed on this July, and that brings us up to where we are today. So I wanted to highlight some important trends that I've seen. I The parcel database, Newcastle County has a parcel search database that's accessible to the public. And I also use Freedom of Information Act requests to get the database for the city of Wilmington. And I just wanted to address this topic that many of us have heard about that uh, is one of the primary changes that have come about since this assessment. And that is that the total commercial property assessment valuation declined as a portion of the tax base. So as a result, residential properties now are carrying more of the total tax burden. And this is like the primary cause of why many residents are facing higher tax bills. So just to describe this dynamic, before across the county in Newcastle County, residential properties were 66% of the total value of the tax base. But after the 2025 reassessment, residential properties are now 76% of the total value of the tax base. And it's even more pronounced in the city of Wilmington, where um, commercial properties were 42%, and now they have gone up. Commercial properties were 42% of the total tax base, and now they have gone down to be just 29%. And residential properties have gone up from 47% of the tax base to representing 57% of the tax base. So the impact of this has been that residential, homeowners, residential properties are carrying more of the burden of paying for services like our public schools, like police, fire, all these things that are paid for with property taxes. And the key, it's a huge dynamic that has led to, although schools have been empowered to raise their revenue 10% more than they collected last year, there are residents who are seeing 40%, 50%. In the fifth district, even 100% or more increases in their tax bills. And this is, you know, not everybody has the money to pay for to have that sudden increase in that housing expense. So I wanted to look at, are Tyler Technologies assessment values accurate? And what I found in looking into the information was a number trends, very important trends, and numerous examples that suggest these trends. So one of those trends is that small business owned commercial properties, you find many of them that are overassessed, meaning that their sale price or their value seems to be, the assessed value seems to be higher than what that property really is worth. Corporate owned commercial properties appear underassessed, and high value corporate owned commercial properties appear very underassessed. That's the dynamics for commercial properties. And for homes, for residential homes, lower value homes, you find a lot of examples of lower value homes being overassessed and higher value homes being underassessed. What that means is if you have a home that's overassessed, it means you couldn't sell it on the open market for the assessment value that you've been assigned. So Tyler Technologies is very clear about how they came to their valuations. Commercial properties are valued by the cost approach, which is what it would cost to rebuild that property, and the income approach, which is, how much money is being made out of that property. This is kind of lease rolls and things like that. So Tyler Technology came to the Wilmington City Council last fall and made a presentation about how they were going to value all the properties. And they made clear that for commercial properties, they had a very specific way of producing values. And that included a combination of looking at what it would cost to rebuild and also, how much that building, what was the revenue generated by that building. So now I want to talk about a few different examples of those trends that we talked about earlier. And one of them is the overassessed small business owned property. So these are two properties. One is on 4th Street near Jackson in the city of Wilmington, and another is out on 202 near Naaman's Road at the corner there. It's like a gas station. And you can see the meat market is valued at $834,000, and the gas station is valued at $625,000. And when I see numbers like these, that makes me wonder, are Tyler Technologies assessment numbers accurate? Like, I don't understand how both of these numbers could be true. If the meat market is worth that much, I would think the gas station would be worth more. And so, the conclusion that I come to, or what makes me think is that small business is overassessed. And you can see that this overassessed small business, their taxes have actually gone up. So in 2024, they paid taxes, school tax. This is red clay. They paid $2,000 in school tax. And this year, a year later, their taxes have gone up to, $5,600. So that's a change of almost $3,000 more this year than last year. And the gas station out on 202, in comparison, paid a school tax of $12,000 last year. And this year, their school tax has come down to $4,000. So they're paying $8,000 less in school taxes. So these are the kind of valuations that I think we need to ask. And we need to, my opinion is we need to make sure that the assessed values are accurate before using them to charge people taxes. I think that that's the government's job, is to make sure that the assessment numbers are accurate. So this is an example of some assessment values for small businesses compared to your corporate-owned small businesses. And then the next example is underassessed and corporate-owned. So this property on Martin Luther King Boulevard is actually a Delmarva building. They have their, I think their gas headquarters there or something like that. And you can see in 2024, they were paying over $100,000 for this. This is last year. They paid over $100,000 in school taxes. This is Christina School District. They paid over $100,000. And this year, they have a new assessed value of 4.3 million, and their school tax has gone down to $34,000. That's a huge drop. And when one person pays less taxes and you're all contributing to the school district budget, someone else is going to pay more. Someone else has to make that up. So that's why, even though this building is not us, it matters to every homeowner what all the other values are. And so you look at this Delmarva building, it's valued at 4.3 million. And then there's this factory here that is valued at 4.8 million. And I wonder, how were these values? How did they come up with these values? That active commercial building, successful company, some would say very successful company, 4.3 million, and then an abandoned factory, 4.8 million. And you can see, I mean, what I would say is that the factory, both of these numbers can't be true. So while the Delmarva building has seen its taxes come down considerably, this abandoned factory is paying more in taxes this year than they did last year. And then the final example of the commercial properties is these underassessed corporate owned properties. And this is actually one of the most significant parts of this assessment is that some of Delaware or some of Newcastle County's most valuable commercial properties are paying a lot less taxes this year than they did last year. And this JP Morgan Chase campus is one of those properties. So this is their whole campus down by the train station in Wilmington. Last year in school tax, Christina's school district received over $2 million from JP Morgan Chase. But this year, 2025, that's dropped to $800,000. That's a drop of over $1 million less in school taxes to Christina School District. And that is on a value of 102 million. So the next, below that is another building, also in downtown Wilmington, also basically a city block. And this building, the DuPont building right on Rodney Square, has a valuation of 419 million. So that's almost, that's more than 4 times the JP Morgan Chase building. And again, I just wonder, how could this building be worth so much more than the JP Morgan Chase building? I think that, I honestly, I think that the JP Morgan Chase building is probably worth more than 102 million. And that part of the reason why its taxes have come down is because it wasn't assessed at its actual full value. And so this DuPont building, you can see that last year it paid $931,000 and this year it's paying over 3 million. So that's a big change. That's a big contribution. And this building was recently renovated and, has a high assessed value. But one of the policy solutions that has been proposed to address the fact that commercial buildings as a portion of the tax base have declined is to split the rate. So, there's a bunch of people who are very concerned about property taxes, and elected officials are coming up with solutions or policy responses. And one of those policy responses is payment plans to help people pay on more than one. If it's a big bill, split that big bill up into smaller bills. But another one that the Delaware legislature will be considering next week is to enable the schools to charge a different rate to commercial properties that they charge to homeowners, that they charge to residential properties. And this slide just shows the impact of this. The city of Wilmington split its tax rate already this spring, and it has an impact on large commercial properties that saw significant declines that is very different from what you might think. So the flat rate was 4.557 per 1,000, and JP Morgan Chase's new assessment times that tax rate resulted in, for city taxes, a loss of $900,000. Like JP Morgan Chase basically paid less, $918,000 less this year than last year in city taxes at a flat rate. This was what was originally proposed. Then the city came back and said, no, we're going to split the rate. We want commercial properties to make up as much portion of our total revenue as they did last year. So we're going to split the rate. We're going to charge commercial properties more. And the result of that was that JP Morgan Chase did pay a little bit more taxes, like in city taxes in 2025. Using the flat rate, it was $464,000, and with the split rate, that does come up to $593,000. But really, what that means is instead of having a drop of 66% in city taxes, this JP Morgan Chase would have a drop of 57%. It's still a huge drop in taxes, even with the split rate. It doesn't address this, what I think is the underassessment of some of these very large commercial properties. And it has other impacts. So you can look at the citywide impact of split rate taxes. Wilmington has about 2,700 commercial properties. And the goal with having a split rate is to have commercial taxes be the same as they were last year. So with the split rate applied to the new assessed values, 73%, basically 3/4, have a property tax increase, which resulted in over $6 million more in commercial tax revenue for those properties from the previous year. But there was also 26% that had a property tax decrease, and that resulted in a $6.6 million decrease in commercial tax revenue for these properties from the previous year. So basically, you have some properties paying more and some properties paying less. And of those properties that were paying less, 120, just 120, have a property decrease of greater than $5,000, which is like almost $6 million just from those 120 properties alone. So the loss of tax revenue is very concentrated in these large commercial properties in Wilmington's downtown. But when the split rate is implemented, it does generate a little bit more money from the large corporate-owned commercial properties, so that they're paying more than they would have under a flat rate, but they're still seeing a giant decrease. And then the other properties that are seeing a decrease are your Delmarva, your corporate-owned commercial properties, those Delmarvas, those properties that are underassessed. They also saw a decrease. And the properties that are seeing an increase in their taxes are, yes, those newly renovated buildings, apartment buildings that Wilmington has downtown. There has been some development, and that is contributing to the commercial tax base. But it's also generated from, a huge number of small businesses, like the meat market, like, stores in a neighborhood near you that are locally owned and that are small businesses. And they see their taxes, when you increase the tax rate on businesses, a lot of the increase is borne by these types of businesses. So the next trend that we really have to look at is there's the commercial property side, and then there is the residential property side. And so, but just going back to the commercial side, that impact of having the small businesses really pick up, paying the more than their fair share of commercial taxes, I think is why we need to get the assessments right. As a policy solution, splitting the tax rate may be a helpful thing to do to charge commercial properties more, but getting the assessments right has to be the first step. Because if the assessments were right, a lot of other things would fall into place. So that's why I think that we don't want to just talk about splitting the rates. We don't want to just talk about payment plans. We also have to make it a priority to say everybody needs to pay their fair share of taxes. And the way to get there is to make sure that the assessed value of every property is accurate. So that brings us to this next part of the discussion, which is residential properties. And what we find in Wilmington, especially in the lower value neighborhoods, is that there are low value properties that are overassessed. So this is an example of a property that sold in February of 2024, which it was in the period when Tyler Technologies was evaluating properties and looking at comparable sales. So this property sold during that window for $100,000, but its assessed value is $163,000. And the impact on the taxes for this property is that they had low taxes, low school taxes. This is red clay. They had $231 in school taxes that has jumped now in 2025 since last year to over $1,000. It's a change of almost $900, which is a significant, amount of money for the owner of that home to come up with, and can be, just basically a financial challenge for that homeowner. And that's one of the most significant dynamics of this reassessment is that some of the areas that have the lowest values and people who have lower incomes are faced with these very significant increases in their tax bills. And then, in contrast, there also is this trend of high value properties that are underassessed. So this property in Greenville sold in June of 2024 for 2.7 million, but its assessed value is 1.4 million. So this property, its school tax actually increased a little bit, but basically stayed the same from 2024 to 2025. Paid $9,000 in taxes last year, pays $9,000 taxes this year. There's like very little change in school taxes. And again, what the assessment, when the court ordered the assessment to be done, it said, Delaware, you have to, our law of the land is that you have to be charging people taxes based on the fair market value of the property. And so, one of the things to think about is for these different homes, what would be the tax implications if they were charged at the assessed rate versus the market rate, which is, what they sold at. So this is an example of a property that was, assessed at $163,000. And it has, we have all the math for what its total bill was. Its total Newcastle bill in 2024 was about $275. And now its total bill, Newcastle County bill, has increased to $1,200, almost $1,000 more than last year. And that's a significant financial challenge for somebody who doesn't have a lot of resources. So what if that property had been taxed at fair market value? That property actually sold for $100,000. So what if they had been charged taxes on the sale value of $100,000? They would still have seen an increase from 2024 to 2025, but it wouldn't have been $1,000. It would have been less than $500. So the fact that this property is overassessed, they're carrying a tax burden that is not only difficult for them to carry, but is also, more than it would have been if they were just taxed on what the actual value of their home is. I don't think that's fair. And then there's this property in Greenville that was underassessed. And again, you can kind of see that it's at its assessed value, its taxes really don't go up or down compared to last year, its whole Newcastle County tax bill. But if it was paying on its on its sale value, on its fair market value, it would have owed, instead of last year, it owed $12,000 in taxes. This year it would have owed $23,000 in taxes, which is more. Its taxes would have gone up compared to last year if this property was taxed on its fair market value, on its sale value. And this, I think these results of, some of the higher value properties seeing tax increases, and some of the lower value properties, maybe seeing tax increases, but not like the dynamic of having the lower value properties have the big tax increases and the higher value properties see their taxes go down, I think surprised everyone. And, I think that one of the reasons, the source behind that dynamic is that the assessed values that Tyler Technologies produced were not accurate enough. Like they were not equal enough to fair market value. And as a result, low value properties often overassessed. They end up paying higher taxes than they should. Higher value properties underassessed. They end up paying lower taxes than they should. And if properties were paying more based on the fair market value, we would see more of the outcomes that we had expected of that kind of more equitable distribution of the tax burden. So then I wanted to, before wrapping up, I just wanted to talk about land values, because the other really different thing about this assessment, and I found these 4 vacant properties actually all within blocks of each other in the west side, and they have very different values. So this is a quiz for people who see it. What do you think each of these values is worth? And you can see they range from $0 to $232,000, where there's very little difference in some ways. They're all just vacant lots in the west side, so that's a huge range. And I wonder, like, how did Tyler Technologies come up with these numbers? So I'll just tell you where they land. The 235 Belmore, that's $0. Somehow it has a valuation of 0. 618 North Broome, that's 18,000. 416 Harrison, that's 41,000. And that one at 1317 West 4th, that's valued at 232,000. Again, there is part of the court case that the courts told Newcastle County is that you have to have more uniformity in how you are charging people taxes. And I do wonder, where is the uniformity in the valuation of land in these assessments? So just in summary, increasing the commercial tax rate doesn't fully recoup lost tax revenue from large underassessed properties. And increasing the commercial tax rate increases the taxes of many smaller businesses. Property tax assessments are inaccurate for a concerning number of properties, and taxes paid on the fair market value of residential properties makes more sense. It's more consistent with what a lot of us believe would come out of the reassessment. And land assessments don't seem to meet the standard for uniformity. That's just an observation that we need to better understand how land assessments came about. So, and that land assessments, because they're part of your overall assessment, it can have huge, it can really impact the total value. So I wanted to just wrap it up there and give everybody a chance to ask questions. And here is my contact information. You can feel free to contact me at any time.